Thank you very much. Michael, Adele, thank you very much for the privilege of being here today. It's a joy. And Eric, now, and by the way, when I get introduced, Bruce is fine. Some places they go the Honorable Bruce, or the Dr. Bruce, or the Sir Bruce, or the Professor Bruce, or whatever. For Bruce is just fine with me. And I will try to stay within the 20 minutes. I can almost guarantee it's going to be maybe 21 or 22, but I want to give two quick thoughts. Side subject. Eric, you mentioned this morning, he said, gee, you think there's a university that allows students the opportunity to identify themselves as male, female, or other? Well, I was quite surprised. It was in Nepal a few months ago, and they're on their official immigration form when you land in Kathmandu. It is male, female, or other. Very surprised by that.
Wow.
But perhaps should not be, because of January 2019 in the state of California, when you get your driver's license, you now have the option to identify yourself as male, female, or non-binary. And I went to get my driver's license renewed in January. I went down and up on the computer screen, it says, what's your address, what's this, what's that, and it popped up, what's your gender? And it gave me 3 options. Oh, wow. I don't know what non-binary means. Maybe I am non-binary. And so I asked the clerk, I said, I don't want to make a mistake. This is a government document. What do you think? What does non-binary mean? And he sort of rolled his eyes and said, anything you want it to mean. So I thought I'd go ahead and be the traditional male. I thought that works for me so far, so good.
Thank God.
I'm going to stick with that. I just flew in from Florida yesterday, where I was working on a conference that was dealing with societal transformation. And at that conference, I spoke with a few different folks. I made one new friend, a lady who was actually from Southern California, who told me that she had been completely isolated now from her daughter, who had rejected her because of her political views. And that she felt very inhibited from speaking to her neighbors because it was not politically correct to have the point of view that she has in a political arena. And that was very frustrating for her. And I met a French woman who had come, and we were talking about the States. She says, I think the United States is very divided and in a great deal of turmoil now. That's the impression around the world. And I had another gentleman comment, says, I think the society is on the verge of collapse. So today, the whole topic of governance, and what had been on my heart was the issue of civil or uncivil discourse. What is at the heart of the political divide, and I'll speak here in the United States, between the far right and the far left? Is the far right really made up of individuals that are greedy, self-absorbed, self-interested individuals? Is the far left really made up of mush-headed, soft-thinking, bleeding hearts, as they're sometimes portrayed? Is there no way for these two sides to come to consensus? Is it impossible for diverse groups to work together for a common purpose? There's many disagreements around the world between opposing political factions of political philosophies. But can these issues only be resolved by violence in words yet behavior? As stated in the introduction to this conference, the invitation, governance should be the process whereby interested parties interact at various levels with the aim of reaching one or more mutually beneficial goals. Therefore, effective discourse, effective problem solving lies at the very core of effective governance. And we have this increasing propensity, it seems, to move to an uncivil level of discourse, and I want to look at the roots and perhaps some of the resolution points of that whole issue. So we can see both at the individual, the community, the industrial, the political party levels, this increasing level of dissension. And I'll share an example here. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, press secretary formerly for President Trump, in June of 2018 was visiting the Red Hen restaurant in Lexington, Virginia, and was asked to leave. And she quoted in a Facebook or a post saying, "Last night I was told by the owner of the Red Hen in Lexington to leave because I work for the President of the United States, and I politely left." Her actions say far more about her than about me. I always do my best to treat other people, including those that I may disagree with, respectfully, and will continue to do so. And her waiter commented on Facebook, "Hey, I just served Sarah Huckabee Sanders for a total of 2 minutes. My owner kicked her out along with the other 7 members of her family." And just days prior to that, Trump's Homeland Security Secretary was forced to leave a Mexican restaurant in Washington, D.C. due to hecklers. Now, some were amazed by this treatment. How could this be so? But others actually actively supported it. One individual tweeted, "They don't serve food to fascists. I'll be promoting this restaurant everywhere I go." Now, name calling, fascist. And I'm not even sure this individual knows what a fascist is. But name calling, homophobe, racist, it is a crude, sensational, stereotypical thinking process. It's more emotional thought than logical thought. And this increasing unwillingness to discuss sensitive issues neutrally and calmly does not bode well for society or our own governance. Now, let me give you a first-hand illustration. I have a friend, let's call him Randy. He lives up in the Boston area. Randy is on very much one side of the political spectrum. I probably tend to be more toward the other side of the political spectrum, but we had some useful discussions to learn from each other. I wanted to understand his worldview. And I had been given a book by Dinesh D'Souza called Stealing America. I don't agree with everything in this particular text, but in the process, I tore this thing apart, as you can tell, and I discovered that there's some good chapters that prompted discussion. So he said, "Yeah, that'd be fine." So the next time I saw Randy, I brought him a copy of the book, and he turned and opened it randomly to the center of the book, somewhere in the middle, top right-hand corner, read 3 sentences, and slammed it and said, "I'm not going to read this. I don't agree with this." Well, now, I was shocked. I said, "Randy, there are things I don't agree with in the book either, but I thought it might be a useful exercise for us to explore those and to learn." But that was the end of that discussion, and he would go no further. I only highlight that story to show that when humans are unwilling to learn from each other, then obviously communication, problem resolution, effective governance stands in danger. Unfortunately, this type of tension goes far beyond individuals, though. Now, let me play you a little clip here, which you may know. Politics and Prose, a little bookstore in northeast Washington, D.C., a pleasant little place. And let me play you a little clip.
You are correct about quite a bit of that. But what you have to offer the white working class is no better. The GOP sells out the workers in this country. But guess what? At the same time, you would have the white working class trade their homeland for handouts. But we, as nationalists and identitarians, can offer the workers in this country a homeland, their birthright, in addition to healthcare, good jobs, and so forth. This land is our land. 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 Yeah!
Stop it there. Now, that was obviously, I hope you would understand, not an effective dialogue. Chanting, booing was not going to dissuade or persuade anybody from anything in this process. That occurred April 27th of this year. And there was a Sunday afternoon little discussion group, an author book reading, about 20 patrons, and this flash mob of 12 or 13 folks showed up and went, flash, let's disrupt this. Now, one would say, oh, that's those silly conservative nationalist folks. But a month earlier, the exact same thing happened to Jeanette Napolitano, who was the former Homeland Security Secretary, when she was booed and heckled and interrupted by left-wing activists at the same bookstore. Now, this freedom to have calm discourse is being discouraged on all sides, compromised. And it may be, I'm speculating, that when you have a sense of personal frustration, that you're not being heard in the community dialogue, you resort to new extremes. This type of behavior is actually encouraged by some of our political leaders. And here I'll make reference to Congresswoman Maxine Waters from California. In June of 2018, she made this comment to supporters in California: let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. If you see anybody from that Trump cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, in a gasoline station, you get out, you create a crowd. You push them back. You tell them they're not welcome here or anywhere anymore. And guilt by association is still with us today. And I'd like to consider a Harvard professor, Ron Sullivan, who on May 11th of this year was terminated by Harvard. The offense that Dean Sullivan had was that he had joined the legal defense team of Harvey Weinstein. And I guess it's politically incorrect to be part of Harvey Weinstein's political defense team. Now, Harvey was being tried on 2 rape allegations. He had not yet been convicted. Practicing law at Harvard while being a Harvard law professor, there's no conflict in that, and the university encourages that. But a number of students, 30, whatever, took exception to this whole concept. And it was deemed, I guess, politically incorrect. So after, he began being dean there since 2009. So after about 10 years, he was booted off the process. Now, another law professor, Alan Dershowitz, commented in reaction to this: any student who feels unsafe in the presence of Dean Sullivan and his wife do not belong at a university. Now, I'm not just saying Harvard, he's saying any university. Feeling unsafe is the new mantra of the new McCarthyism. Is an excuse for firing anyone, from a Republican or a Muslim. If the students who demanded the firing of Sullivan had been around in 1776, John Adams would have been fired as the author of the Declaration of Independence, because he made them feel unsafe, because he represented the Brits accused in the Boston Massacre. Poignant comment and a poignant contrast. It's easy to violate political correctness. Now, for a number of years, I've been associated with the governor's California's finance here in the state of California. And it's a rarefied atmosphere. It's a very political elite atmosphere. And sometimes seemingly disconnected with the reality of the world around us. At one juncture, I simply was standing at a copy machine doing a project. I was almost done. I saw a colleague come in out of the corner of my eye, and I merely said, "Just a second, ma'am, I'm almost done," with the intent of saying, "Hey, you won't have to wait long. You know, don't worry." Only to be rebuffed by a 2 or 3 minute diatribe of how rude I was, how unprofessional I was. Didn't I have professional training? Didn't I know the platinum rule? Treat others as they want to be treated? I just stood there and observed the process, and I didn't feel very respected myself. You know, and if she'd simply said, "Hey, I don't like the term ma'am," because I meant no offense by that. Many think the term is polite. She takes exception. I say, "Hey, say, go ahead, finish your copies. By the way, next time I don't prefer that term." That would have been a useful discussion and discourse. And I must tell you, one day when I was teaching a managerial training there for the other managers, I came along and I used a concept of, I said this was an Oriental concept. None of my Asian colleagues had a conflict with that, but the one HR person in the back of the room almost died of immediate coronary. and I received all sorts of grief over that. And I just have to say, I'm sorry, I did not get the memo. No offense intended at all. And even it comes to the point where your political friends turn against you, even when you're attempting to sound reasonable. Dianne Feinstein, in 2016, on the election of Trump presidency, commented that she hoped he would be successful as a president. Roundly criticized all of her political allies for saying that. And a few months later, she was booed by a crowd of 800 at a San Francisco event when she said, I hope that Trump could be a good president if he changed his direction. Look, this man is going to be president most likely for the rest of his term. I think we have to have some patience. It's only 8 months into the tenure of his presidency, for which he was booed roundly. Wow. It seems that people hear things they want to hear. They interpret things they want the way they want to interpret them. And it's a life principle that I've often commented on. You find what you look for. If I'm looking for good employees, I will find good employees in my organization. If I'm finding bad employees, I will find bad employees, even though they're likely the same employees in the same circumstance. One additional phenomenon that is a great concern to me personally is growing in popularity, and that is of the economic boycott. Now, in Georgia, last May, they passed an anti-abortion law. And quickly, within days, I mean, literally 2 or 3 days, Netflix said it was withdrawing all business from Georgia, which has developed quite a substantial Hollywood filmmaking industry there. Disney, CBS, Sony announced that they were going to reevaluate their production plans if the law was not overturned in the courts by January 2020. Now, frankly, maybe I'm just not as bright as I used to be. I don't see the nexus between an unborn child's life and making movies. Maybe it's simply saying that if I happen to lose in the democratic process, as those proponents did in Georgia, that maybe I'll just pout and yell and scream in the corner like a child would. It's resorting to economic violence. It's, I don't like your policy, so I'm going to bully and beat you up economically. Now, Bernie Sanders is on the campaign trail right now espousing democratic socialism. Some of us may not be too keen on that idea, but I wonder, should we? Oops, not working.
We believe God has the best government and the best.
That might be Bernie Sanders.
That may be Bernie Sanders. So I'm wondering, should we boycott maple syrup from Vermont? Because I'm not too keen on Bernie's ideas. I am not sure. Because we disagree with others about public policy, which is debated in the normal policy process, should we attempt to bully or intimidate others economically? Now, I believe in vigorous debate, and when the final vote is taken, that's the new law. And then even then, I think citizens should vigorously debate, should the law be changed? However, intimidation of whatever form, physical, verbal, economic, or otherwise, is not, in my opinion, part of the legitimate debate process. It is intended to coerce others to accept my point of view. It hinders debate, it doesn't enhance debate. And in an effective debate, hopefully all parties have open hearts, open minds of what is happening and is listening to other people. An effective democracy is not about imposing my views upon others. It's about developing the consensus that we spoke about earlier. And while there are frequently no perfect answers, and compromise is quite possible and necessary, we have to learn not to react emotionally. We need to react intelligently. And regrettably, the media is not assisting in this calm discussion. The media is in a competition for viewers, and they want to have what sells. And it is the scandalous, it is the sexy, it is the sensational, which tends to sell. And I can speak to that in my own personal experiences as an elected official at various levels for various terms. The media does not always represent your views successfully. You know, you can speak for 20 minutes about topic A, and what comes out is a 20-second spot about topic B. I've observed that, to the point that I've coined this, and the media does not care for it, but I refer to the foggy filter of the media. Because the media gives you a little bit of a cloudy picture of what's going on, but not necessarily a clear understanding of all that is happening. And scandal itself has become a tool for political intimidation. Now, John Marini, a professor of political science at Nevada University, spoke at Hillsdale College last fall, and he made this observation: scandal can provide a way for defenders of the political status quo to undermine the legitimacy of those who have been elected on a platform of changing the status quo. So if I can't beat them in the ballot box, if I can do things to derail them, or the pretense of scandal, or in the words of the 1962 Western film, if you ever saw this, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. The editor of the local newspaper, talking about a sensitive political issue, decided not to publish the truth, with the justification that when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. In this age of misinformation, beware the writer, the reader, the free mind, the free man. I do appreciate this from Leo Rosten in his 1962 acceptance speech in the National Book Awards. The most critical problem which free men face today is to get some of their co-citizens to listen to that which seems to threaten them. For the right to talk involves the duty to listen. And he continues, we must desperately hard learn to see things not as we are, but as they are. The function of the writer, the thinker, the editor, the free man, is to stubbornly and painfully to find the truth. Truth as it is, not as I want it to be, or I hope it to be, or I prefer it to be, but what is the truth? That is our quest. In 2016, there was a national hoax called Pizzagate. And this occurred in Washington, D.C. again. There was a conspiracy theory that at Comet Ping Pong, Bill and Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring. I don't know if you remember this. Well, I actually went there to see what was happening. And by the way, in December of 2016, Edgar Welch came from North Carolina with a rifle and a revolver, attempting somewhat misguidedly to save the children. And in that process, discharged his weapon several times into a locked storage cabinet, for which he is now serving 4 years in prison. And unfortunately, no one was hurt. But the amazing thing, there is no basement at Comet Ping Pong. I spoke to the staff. They had to spend thousands of dollars on security to protect their patrons, etc. But this misinformation filtered through the whole country. I would seriously consider that we should make the intentional propagation of false news illegal. Because truth is so essential as a foundation for making intelligent decisions in public policy. Now, while we may discourage fake news, it's going to be very hard to prohibit people from acting foolishly. So let me recap here just briefly. Governance requires problem solving. Problem solving requires understanding. Understanding requires communication among all parties. The third step is where we are faltering at this point, due to the lack of civil discourse. Situations where emotions override rational thinking. situations where someone feels that they must win and others must lose at all costs. Situations where coercion is justified. And the impact of this breakdown, I believe, is significant, because it does create that feeling of being inhibited, unable to express myself. Just like this lady could not talk to her children or to her neighbors anymore. And the inability to express ideas leads to less viable solutions. And it comes to a situation much like sugar diluted in salt water. That is the result we get. And the lack of tolerance of others generates even greater emotional hostility. And indeed, those that make civil discourse impossible seemingly make violent revolution inevitable. Perhaps if I yell louder than you, then I will be heard or win. Perhaps if I throw a tantrum and bully and coerce, then maybe I will be heard or win. Perhaps if I use economic or social pressure to shame you into submission to my ideas, then perhaps I may win. Or if you follow the legal maxim of Carl Sandburg many years ago, he said, if the facts are with you in the court of law, argue the law. If the facts are against you, argue the law. If the law is against you, argue the facts. If the law and the facts are against you, just pound the table and yell like hell. But it's a slippery slope to believe that if you do not agree with me, therefore you must also hate me. For it is indeed our duty never to resort to violence. It is to understand each other, never to resort to violence. And in Ralston's continuing his comments, we must learn to seek change without violence. Always change and never violence, not in words or deeds. We must try to understand each other by reconciling ourselves to the fact that most of us simply grow taller but do not mature. We must meet fanaticism with courage, idealism with caution. We must be skeptical of that which is promised but not proven. We must be strong enough to be gentle. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Highly Effective Habits of Effective People, his 5th habit is to understand others before helping them understand us. That's a good motto. So while the process has become derailed at that 3rd step, probably some of their solutions can be discovered in the remaining steps. That communication requires trust. Trust requires relationship. And in my work in peace and reconciliation, I've discovered that relationship often requires forgiveness. But forgiveness requires the ability to change, and the ability to change requires humility. Therefore, our core problems for civil discourse probably are personal character, lack of self-control, false logic, human foolishness, and human selfishness. But I must say, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly, there's some good news. I think about Annie Roughhouse, Atwater, Roughhouse Annie, as she was called, and C.P. Ellis, the exalted Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan in Durham, North Carolina, in 1971, were ordered to co-chair a mediation for integration of the schools in Durham. Talk about an intense time, lots of emotion. But the story of how these 2 individuals, who are natural arch enemies, came together, began to develop respect and care for each other, serves as a wonderful illustration of what I wonder surely can be done again and again and again and again. So I wonder, I go back here in final thoughts. If Roughhouse and CP could do that, surely then I wonder about Sarah Wilkinson, the owner of the Red Hen. She told the Washington Post, there are moments in time when people need to live in their convictions. This appeared to be one. But in retrospect, rather than ejecting her after 2 minutes, if she simply walked over and knelt down by Sarah and said, Sarah, could we talk? Could I develop a dialogue with you? Could I develop a relationship with you? Could we meet at another time? Perhaps a wonderful opportunity was missed. A wasted opportunity due to emotional reaction that was neither respectful or caring. We'll go back. The acts of the flesh are obvious in Galatians 5. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, ambition, dissension, factions, and all the like. And in verse 22, 23, we have the opposite, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, etc. Against such there is no law. And in verse 25, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us continue to remember and practice that we all need God and His power of His Spirit to overcome the power of the flesh.
Amen.
And hopefully take some solace and hope that, as Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, the mind, once expanded to the dimensions of the larger ideas, never returns to its original size. So let's expand the world with the ideas of Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit. And I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. And if anything I said today makes sense, give credit to Jesus Christ. If anything I said today sounds a little, not so sure, then I take responsibility. God bless you. Thanks very much.